Testing. We're going to get this. Now it's like I'm getting no internal microphone. Here we go. Testing 1, 2, 3. How about that? Yes. Persistence. Persistence pays off. All right, we're back. Hello. We've got it all tonight. We have visuals and we have sound. Thank you for being patient, and I'm going to try to move some things around here. Thank you for showing up kind of in spur of the moment on this lovely summer evening here in South Central Texas. And it's been a pretty good weekend. We had some of our trademark storms, and they were quite cleansing in a lot of ways. And I just want to thank people for chiming in and giving me some support on this Neptune transit that's just crashed on the shore of my 4th house. It's been pretty intense. And it's really interesting is I went to astro.com, which is always a good source for all things that are astrology related. And there's an article there tonight that a woman put up, and she was talking about Pluto and Uranus and Neptune. Let me see if I can find the actual article. It's worth reading. Let me just go home here. If you have or experience, and by the way, I have a client slash reader, and she sent me an email, and she basically told me that she lives with, and I remember her chart, she lives with Neptune on her south node in her 4th house, and her black moon Lilith is there. That is an assignment. So Ann Whitaker, who is a pretty well-known astrologer, I think she lives in London, England. Anyway, she wrote an article over on astro.com, what happens when Pluto, Neptune, and Uranus cross the IC. Well, she's doing okay, so when Neptune crossed her IC, I guess she's fine, but some of the descriptions of her experience are a little interesting, to say the least. Dealing with ghosts, I mean, I think that's what, when we get into things like spirits and ghosts, Neptune in the 12th house in Pisces, I think is a pretty strong metaphysical force as it relates to that sign. And so when Neptune comes down into your 4th house, it's like, in some ways it's like the ghosts of the past and the ghosts of what you were raised on and your values, because that's really the 4th house. It's your emotional values and what went on in your life. And it's been interesting. I've been thinking, not intensely, but I've been thinking about my legacy as it relates to the paternal members of my family. And one of my, growing up, I was almost terrified to have kids because my father's childhood was really rough, and it took him. He was kind of a force of nature in his own way, and he had a lot of Leo and Scorpio in his chart, for better or worse. I mean, the guy was an interesting character, and he used a lot of willpower to straighten out his life. And I tip my hat to him, because he did not have an easy upbringing. His father had an even worse upbringing, and his father was a really hardcore, troubled man, alcoholic, and wrapped his car around a tree, picked up a hitchhiker, and that was it. That was what my father had to live with, was not much of a father, right? And even before him, his dad was not a very, I would say, this grounded person. So from a patrilineal line, I've been thinking about this in these people, and as Neptune sort of settles into my 4th house and trying to understand sort of the legacy of Neptune in our own past. And we all have it, Whatever's in your 4th house, that's the repository of how you were raised, where you get your emotional values from. And I've seen some charts that have some real fireworks down in the 4th house. That Pluto in the 4th house, Saturn sometimes conjunct Mars. I would say that in most cases, If a person has Mars in the 4th house, they've had violence at home. It's been part of their upbringing. Now, as people have gotten older, and it's interesting because you can see this played out generationally. Like, if I have a client that was born, say, in the 1940s, or even the very early 1950s, the amount of intensity that you'll find in a 4th house dialogue is generally much greater than somebody who grew up or was born in the 1970s or even the 1980s. And the difference between the two is that, and this is generational, is that if you find somebody who was born in the 1970s, 1980s, and they've got some difficult 4th house material, in many instances, the aspects will not be prolonged. So what I mean by that is, let's say, for instance, there's violence, or there's some sort of form of abuse, or some sort of form of codependency, whatever that is. If you go back into people that were born in the late 40s and 50s, that stays with them. Those relationships, those homes, generally speaking, were not broken. Now, that doesn't mean that they didn't happen, or the homes weren't broken, because they were like my father. He was very young. I think his mother was, he was around 12 or 13 when my grandmother divorced his father, so he was born in 1935, so around 1947, 1948, people get divorced back then. So it does happen, or it did happen. But you can see this in the 4th house with people who were born during that time. Those aspects stayed with them, like they couldn't get out. You know, the 4th house almost became a prison in some ways. But as divorce became easier, when you get into the 70s, which is really the big, you know, when you get into Pluto and Libra, it's kind of like, that's it, man. I mean, the whole notion of partnership and marriage and relationship just gets completely exploded with Pluto and Libra. And that's really the divorce generation. And then you go past that, and again, it gets kind of easier and easier and easier. Those aspects are still there, but they don't prolong. It's not like people are living with, you know, 18 years of hardcore stuff or abuse, for better or worse. I mean, there's other aspects to that are more difficult in some ways. Depends on, you know, what happens after that. But it's an interesting kind of notice. And we're going to talk a lot about emotion tonight because we're obviously in Cancer. The sun is at 4 degrees. And we just had a new moon over the weekend on Friday and Saturday. And right now the moon is in Leo. So I went through the later phases of Cancer yesterday. And this is an interesting time. The solstice energy is very, very powerful, but it is in many ways a culmination energy. You know, we start in the springtime, and we have the seed of birth, rebirth, renewal, and let's go back here. And what happens? We get to the midsummer night, and the midsummer night is the summer solstice, and it actually represents a peak. I mean, even chronologically, like the days are going to start to get, you know, incrementally darker, slightly darker with each passing day. You know, so we've reached the peak, and there's a sense here. It's not quite that. It doesn't carry with the same kind of newness that the spring equinox has, but there's an enlivening of the energy, for sure. And if we look at it from the perspective of Cancer, in a lot of ways it's an internalization of the energy. Because, number one, we're dealing with the 4th house. That's the ruling house of Cancer. And number two, of course, if you're living here in the United States, you're dealing with all of the mythology that goes along with the United States as a Cancer country. And this is a time where there's a lot of deep emotion. And we haven't come into this Cancerian phase before. Because everything before Trump is like pre-Trump. It's like PT. And then there was AT after Trump. And it's a really fascinating kind of phenomenon, because when we get into the impact of astrology, or we get into the impact of something as powerful as Cancer. And Cancer is a very powerful sign. I think it's one of the most underrated signs in the zodiac, to be quite honest with you. All the water signs I think tend to be underrated, although Scorpio gets a lot of press for being powerful, magnetic, and evil, and sexual, and dark, and all those kinds of adjectives that go along with Scorpio. So it gets press, so sometimes it gets bad press. Pisces gets bad press too. Cancer, the biggest knock on Cancer is clingy, right? It's the clingy nature. It's the crab that wants to hold on to the rock as the surf pounds it. And there's some beauty in that. There's some beauty in that. We have to understand, the difference between clinging and commitment. And sometimes, we'll have to stare that down in our lives. But, I think that in a lot of ways we've been trained so much to, okay, let go and move on, let go and move on, go and move on. And I think that, I think we have to kind of redress that and re-examine it. By the way, I want to, since we're into Cancer, we're into home, and we're into things like, people get out the grill during the summertime, and I love to grill, love to barbecue, and I don't do it as often as I'd like to, but I love it. And there's a great documentary on Netflix called Steak Revolution, and it's all about this guy he's a French butcher who denounces French steak. He's like banned from the French Butchers Union because he said that British beef was better. Anyway, he goes around the planet looking for the best steak in the world, and it becomes almost like, it's not by cinema verite, but it's very close, and it's fairly artsy, and you get to learn all about these various breeds of cattle and how they're raised, and it's actually a really fascinating movie in marbling and genetics and why certain cows work in some parts of the world and other cows don't, and grass-fed versus corn-fed. Anyway, it's a very Cancerian topic if you're into that sort of thing. But these are the things that we're going to be dealing with, over the course of the next 26 degrees of the sign. It's all about things like, barbecuing and cooking and loving and growing and nurturing. These are all really important energies. And if you look at where we are planetarily, we've got a fair amount of Cancerian influence. We've got Sun in Cancer, Mercury Cancer, and Mars in Cancer. So we have a stellium in Cancer. Stellium, of course, is when three or more planets are in one sign. And Mercury is going to catch up to Mars here pretty quickly this week, as a matter of fact. So there's going to be a lot of emotion out there. There's going to be a lot of emotion this week. And the thing about Cancer that is the most kind of profound aspect of it is this notion of being able to take something, hold on to it, care for it, nurture it, and grow it. And this is going to be a dialogue that will obviously show up in people's lives. Venus is in Taurus at 20 degrees, and it's in a wide sextile with Mars. And Mars won't catch up to Taurus because won't catch up to Venus. What I mean by that is it won't get to 17, 18, 19, 20 degrees. Venus will move into the following sign, which will be Gemini. But it's nice to have these kinds of really nurturing, grounded, caring aspects. Now, after the moon goes into Leo here in the next couple of days, it's going to be in Virgo. So if we zoom out and we're on Wednesday, we're going to have Sun in Cancer, Mercury in Cancer, Venus in Taurus, Mars in Cancer, and the moon in Virgo. That's a lot of really grounded, solid, real energy that's available. So I think that there can be a period here over the course of the next week, especially when the moon goes into Virgo, and all those Cancerian planets are going to soften up the moon a little bit, right? Adding that water to the earth, and so I think that there's going to be some opportunities to really have some very grounded and clear, but not detached. We're not in a detached mode with these energies. These energies are much more engaged on an emotional level, and it can be, quite liberating if you're willing to open up emotionally. And again, there's the safety net of Venus and Virgo, because that Virgo moon doesn't want to mess up, right? I don't want to mess up. That's the nature of the Virgo moon. But with all this water coming through with the Virgo moon, it makes it less critical. There's almost a sense of it's okay. You can, spill something, or you can color outside the lines, or you can say something that maybe your heart has moved you to say, and this critical juncture of the moon in Virgo doesn't often allow it. So this is actually a really good week. I like the way the week is starting up, even with the moon in Leo. It's, moon Leo's gregarious. It's bold. It's creative. Sometimes it's a little showy, but you know what? So what? It's all good. We've got enough sort of kind of watery excess to take on some of that hot Leo moon. So I think this is actually the start of a really good week astrologically. And if you can in some parts of the country still do some planting, although the country's been in just torrid heat over the last week. And the best time to have done that planting would have been around Friday, Saturday on that new moon. Depending on where you are, what part of the country you're in, you can still get some decent growing season. If you're in the south, you can stretch it out to about October. So there's still some time to do some planting, but really the best on the solstice moon itself. Mars in Cancer, we talked a little bit about that last week. It's a very defensive kind of Mars. The way the United States was set up with the Constitution, July 4th, the way it was set up was it was supposed to be a country that would be defensive. Like, we're not going to go out and attack. But if you attack us, we'll, get out the Cancer claws and we'll come get you, right? But that all got blown up along the way. And the latest kind of version of that, of course, was 9/11, which abrogates the Constitution as we know it, and we became a very different country under the 9/11 Patriot Act. Patriot Act changed everything. So, but this is the nature of Cancer. Cancer is protective. It does not force the action. It is generally reactive and responsive versus ostentatious and kind of, pushing the action. We've got Jupiter in Libra tonight, still there, 13 degrees. And Jupiter will be squaring the Sun here in the next few days. We're about a week away from the Jupiter-Sun square. And we've got a Jupiter-Mars square happening right now. And, anytime you get a square to Jupiter, it is not bad. It is not a bad thing. Jupiter squares tend to over-exaggerate or have the potential to open things up. So if you're ever going through like a transit with a Jupiter square, or you've even got a Jupiter square in your chart, don't sweat it. It's just, you just have to find the right balance with a Jupiter square, because it's trying to tease open the opportunity, to tease open the expansion. That's the nature of the Jupiter square. But coming up here in about a week, we're going to have that Jupiter-Sun square, and there can be some oversensitivity. That's the one thing about Cancer, is the oversensitivity to it. I have Mars in Cancer. When I was a kid in school, man, I was so sensitive. Ugh. I was one of those kids that cried. It's not good. It's not good. Anyway, got over it eventually, but Mars in Cancer, so the Cancer is oversensitive. But it also makes for very kind of intuitive and kinesthetic relationship to emotions in the world around us. So what is the recipe? I think with all this Cancer in the Venus and in Taurus, this is a time to put the world aside for a while. There's crazy shit happening all the time. All the time. Like every single day, there's stuff that will just at times stop you in your tracks. And now it's like, and I talked about this on the Friday show a little bit. I talked more about it on Thursday. But we used to have the mainstream media. And it was God, right? The mainstream media was God. And when Uranus went into Aries, it was like, okay, the people are going to take over the tools. The people are going to take over the media, because that's what Uranus became. It became YouTube, it became the internet, it became social media, it became podcasting, and it was given, the people had the power. This is what happened during Uranus and Aries, and it's still happening, right? And what's happened is we've had this tidal shift, this seismic shift from the mainstream media to thousands and thousands of channels on YouTube that get hundreds of thousands of hits. And the mainstream media channels don't do nearly as well. So this is a really interesting time with this Uranus and Aries piece. But what's happening is that circus is closing. That circus is closing up. And I don't know if it's going to a new town or not. People talk about Steam as a viable alternative to YouTube. I don't know about it yet as to how long or how much it could actually traffic. It could actually handle. Vimeo would never be able to handle the same amount of traffic as YouTube. When you think about all the bandwidth you have to run YouTube, it's got to be enormous. But anyway, even in that realm, you could find something, right? I mean, let's say it's actually a quiet day on the planet. Maybe there's nothing. Maybe I don't know. Putin decided to move his car or something. I don't know. And we do have these days every now. They're fewer and further in between, but we still have them. But you could go into YouTube and you could find any number of controversies now happening on YouTube with these various forces who seem to be fighting against each other now, for whatever reason, whether they're trolls or shills, or it's just the nature of what happens when you get to the end of a degree. Because when we're at right now, we're at 27 Uranus, and when you get to 27 and 28 of any degree, the degree starts to go nuts, right? The energy of the degree, the energy of the sign begins to just completely kind of go crazy. You think of the analogy I use, and I talked about it in the course, the analogy I use is when a star gets to supernova, and it gets really, really bright and really, really hot, and it's really unpredictable, and then it implodes after supernovas, and there's no energy left at 29 degrees, and it goes to zero, and then it's reborn into the next sign. And it's a brand new, shiny sign, full of power at 0 degrees, right? So when you get to 27, 28, it's in the nova stage. And we're in the nova stage right now with Uranus and Aries, so there's a lot of craziness going on. There's a lot of infighting, and there's all kinds of stuff that's happening, on the YouTube side of things, and even not on the YouTube side of things. I mean, look at the whole scene with Gaia and Corey Good and David and people that have decided that they're going to make an example of what's going on over there. I've kind of stayed out of it a little bit. I mean, I did get into it. I talked about some of the stuff that Randy was bringing up, and some of the people that were bringing up other salient points, but there was also some other energy that was not great, and I talked about that as well. And I'm not sure where that's all going. I know that Regina had Corey Good on her show. I think it was about a week or two ago. By the way, I haven't been formally notified, but I don't think I'm going back to Gaia, because if I was going back to Gaia, I would have been there about a month ago. So if you're going to be looking, when you're going to be on Gaia, when you're going to be on Gaia, people ask me that. I don't know, because I was not formally invited back. So I think that might be over. Never say never, but I think it might be over. This is what happens with Uranus 27. Now, when Uranus goes into Taurus next year, boy, get ready for that. That's going to be really interesting. Now, it only goes into Taurus for a while and flips back into Aries. And we go back into the crazy degrees of Aries again. So we'll see what happens with that. Saturn's at 23. Sagittarius, retrograde. And it's an interesting, this Saturn-Sagittarius transit has been really interesting. And in a lot of ways, very powerful with this whole idea of getting to the truth. And it was really interesting. I was watching the Megyn Kelly interview with Vladimir Putin. And it's amazing what the mainstream media does. It's crazy. So the interview was, Putin was just a stone cold assassin in that interview. Megyn Kelly had her whole list of questions, and she was going to get him. There was no way she could touch that guy. He was always turning everything around. He was so cool, and there was no, every reporter was looking for the gotcha, the smoking gun, and there was none. And after every question she would ask him, he would turn it around and flip it back on her. She had no ability to dialogue, and it was embarrassing. She would just go to the next question and the next question, and it was only 15 minutes long, and she looked like an utter amateur. And then what NBC did is they went back and they created this whole thing about Putin and this and that, and they basically took away the austerity of the relationship, and not the relationship, but the interview. And they inserted video and they fluffed it up, and it was it was ridiculous. If you go back and you watch that raw interview, man, Megyn Kelly is just so out of her depth with Vladimir Putin. Not even close. And then of course she decides she's going to go beat up on Alex Jones, and Alex Jones did not come out looking real good in that interview. And the whole idea, of course, is to link Alex Jones to Donald Trump and conspiracy theorists and yada 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 yada. And that's even part of the Uranus and Aries piece, right? What is Alex Jones known for? Info wars, info warriors. That's Uranus and Aries. This is like his time, and it was interesting, although pathetic, to be honest with you. One of the things they want to do is they want to shoot down the ability to be truthful and to communicate and to share information and knowledge, and that's happening in a number of different ways. There's the kind of overt way which we're going to scapegoat, demonize Alex Jones in a way that listens to him. So that happens, right? And anytime you talk about subjects or topics which are considered conspiratorial, there's even more of a hot button now than ever before. You're listening to that guy who denied everything around Sandy Hook. You know what Alex Jones should have said? He should have said, yeah, I don't believe anybody died. And I want to I'll tell you what, Megan, why don't you give me on your network an hour's worth of time, and I'll employ my researchers and my investigators, and I'll give you 60 minutes worth of proof on your network that nobody died there. Wouldn't that be shocking, right? No, I believe that. Nobody died. Give me some time. Give me an hour's worth of time on your network, and we'll put it together. And you can do an hour show afterward to prove me wrong, right? But you could, and the problem with Alex is that he's on the record. And then when he's on a show like what he did with Megyn Kelly, it's ridiculous because he has to walk everything back. And that's what he had to do. He had to walk back almost every single piece, including Pizzagate, which he got stung for, including the Chobani thing we got stung for, and the Sandy Hook stuff. But anyway, a little bit. But this is the Saturn in Sagittarius, and what they're trying to do is they're trying to constrict and contract, especially now that Saturn's retrograde, how we share truth or how we share information, wisdom, and it's being truncated. And if you look at the Saturn has been in square with Chiron in Pisces. So we've had this square energy going on, this Piscean, Neptunian, like the wounding, right? So I'll give you an idea of the wounding, where Chiron comes in. Here's Alex Jones, and he posits that Sandy Hook didn't happen. And then you have, what's his name, Neil Heflin comes onto the show, and Megyn Kelly show, and says, I went to school, I got my son off in the morning in the car, and came home and brought him home in a body bag. It's like, okay, that's moving. It's like, oh my God, that's terrible, right? That's terrible. It's like, oh, the wound, that's the wound. And nobody wants their kid to die, and nobody wants anybody else's kid to die, especially if a kid, because it connects into the kid and the whole relationship to your kid. But what was interesting about that is, and I talked about this on Friday, is that according to Wayne Carver, the guy who was the medical examiner, he said that none of the parents saw the kids. None of them. And that they showed him pictures. And here Neil Heflin is talking about how he held his kid in his arms. And, well, that didn't, according to the medical examiner, that didn't happen. He said he had a bullet to the head. A bullet to the head. And Carver said that between, everybody had 3 to 6 bullets in them. 3 to 6. But this is the challenge, the astrological challenge, right? Because we have the wounding, the Chiron and Pisces, the wounding. Oh my God! Oh no! Oh no! Oh no! But what's really the truth? And it's not just Sandy Hook and Neil Heflin. It's all these other events. And Saturn's been in square with Chiron for roughly the last year. So it gets away, it drains away from the potentiality of the truth, because this is what Pisces does. It drains everything away, and it drains it away through the notion of the wound, and using the wound, and using our compassion, and using feeling against us. And there will be times when this will happen, because if we continue to unplug and we go into our discernment mode, then something tragic will happen. Something real will happen, right? And all of us are sitting around saying, this didn't happen, this didn't happen, this didn't happen, and this didn't happen. And guess what? Something's going to happen. Because this is the way these things are. Or at the very least, they'll make it look like something happened. So we got to be careful. We have to be on our toes a little bit. But aside from that, right, what I really wanted to talk about with this energy that's available, especially this week, like, do something different. We've got all this wonderful Cancerian energy, like cooking and eating and drinking wine and wine tasting and puttering in your garden and noticing that there are butterflies, there are varieties of bugs, and there are varieties of birds, and yes, they're in the air, and yes, they're doing what they're supposed to do, their part in this wonderful thing called creation. And there's also people that you know and care about, and in love. Right? This is a good time. This week is a good time to sit down and break bread. It's a good time to say, fuck the rest of the world for a week or so. Let's get down into basics. Let's get down into feeding each other. And I'll tell you what, as a kind of an exercise here, because, we'll come up on the full moon eventually in Capricorn. That's a whole other... it's 2 weeks away, and that's a whole other ball of wax. And we're coming very close to the American eclipse. I think next week we should do the show on the Great American Eclipse that's coming. I'll do an in-depth 2-hour thing on the Great American Eclipse. We'll look at the last Great American Eclipse, and we'll look at potentially what could happen. And I owe a young man a kind of reply about his chart with the eclipse. I get busy sometimes. So we'll do that. But this week, enjoy the earth. Enjoy the fruits of the earth. Enjoy the fruits of connecting and bonding with another person, and you can actually share food, bring food, feed each other. If there's somebody that you know that's isolated and they don't have any real connection, and you haven't talked to them in a while, invite them over. Bring them over and say, hey, how would you like to come over? We're having, skewers of chicken and some wine tonight and some watermelon. Come on over. Spend some time with us. This is a good time to do it, because we're just on the other side of the solstice, and it's not the same energy, like I said, as the spring equinox. Right? It's not the same energy, but there is something very inviting about the energy of the solstice and the midsummer nights, and conviviality and joining. There's actually a lot of pretty lustful or lusty, let's say lustful, lusty energy around this time as well. Things are growing, right? Things are growing. Frogs are mating. Crickets are chirping, and there's a lot of creation going on out there. So, open your table and open your heart, and, open a nice bottle of wine and share it with some people this week. This is we've got to take time out every now and then and just unplug from the maelstrom and the matrix. It'll always be there, trust me, and there'll be new iterations of it. What else do we have here? Neptune and Pisces, yeah, right there on my IC. Man, I'm just not looking forward to the next 2.5 years. Neptune, just cruising through my 4th house. Ugh. I do get a reprieve though. Next year Jupiter goes into Sagittarius, and it'll be my 1st house. I'll have some fun. I guarantee I'll have some fun during that time. Neptune and Pisces retrograde. It's a good time if you were so inclined to look at your water. Where does it come from? What can you do differently with your water? Have you changed your filters lately? Do you have a filter? It might be a good time for you to examine that with Neptune and Pisces retrograde. The other thing with Neptune and Pisces retrograde, Neptune, I think Neptune really is in a lot of ways a repository of fear. It has ecstasy and it has liberation and all the other elements that are associated with Neptune and Pisces. I mean, that's the nature of that energy. It's like incredibly high and incredibly low. But it also, there's an element of fear with Neptune and Pisces. Ghosts, demons, apparitions. In retrograde, it might be a good time for you to explore them. All of us to explore them. The true node is in Leo, 25 degrees. And I'm wondering when and where the next big child trafficking bust is going to occur. We'll see about that. We'll see what happens. Children should be getting a lot of attention with the true node in Leo, that's for sure. It's at 25 degrees, so we're still in the... It's interesting with the nodes, like they work backwards. So the true node is in the 3rd decan. So it basically goes from, Aries to Sagittarius to its own sign, which would be in Leo. So we're 3rd decan with the true node. The other thing we've got is the south node in Aquarius. I mean, we talked about the true node a lot, but the south node in Aquarius is a little freaky, There's some freaky stuff going on with South Node Aquarius, and sort of the mutants and the hybrids that are in our midst. I've been reading some stuff about these. They're not even transgender. They're men that have self-identified as women. And okay, so there's 2 examples. There's a guy who is I think he's either I think he might be college or a high school track person. And it's a he who's identifying as a she and running in track meets. And he is beating all these women. And because he's identifying as a woman. And he's got long hair, but he's got the biology of a man. And he's kicking ass. And then, on the other side, on the flip side, there's a young woman who's going through a change, hormonal change, because she's wanted to self-identify, she's becoming a male, and she's wrestling. She's a high school wrestler, and to help her, she's getting steroids. Now think about that. Okay, now the high school wrestlers, the male high school wrestlers, they can't use steroids because it's illegal, and yet this young woman who's transitioning can use steroids, and she's weightlifting, and she's getting strong as hell. So now she's got her own kind of advantage/disadvantage. It's very weird. I think this is South Node Aquarius stuff, by the way. The sun is in its fall in Aquarius. So, identity under Aquarius, especially the South Node, is, how shall we say, sort of on the dark side in some ways. It's recessive. I'm not sure what it's going to take in order to either balance these things out or flip the script. because there are numerous stories of people who go through gender modification, and they're not good. They're not good at all, and of course they never get mainstreamed. That never happens. Why don't we do this? I'm going to put up a chart here. We're going to play a little chart astrology, and I know for all you ladies out there, you're going to like this chart. Let's see if I can just grab it here. Let's go image. There we go. Where are we? There we go. Alrighty. So this is a guy that I started following sort of tangentially when I was about 20, 21. And I started to go to clubs in San Francisco. This is Chris Isaac. There you go. Looks like a Keith Haring thing behind him. Chris Isaac, when I first saw him, was a member of a band called Silvertone. And he'd just come out of the Central Valley. He was living, I think, in Modesto. And he was a boxer, and he had this rockabilly thing going on with his band Silvertone, and they were fantastic. They were a great band. And it's his birthday tomorrow. He's a Cancer. Does not have the classic Cancerian face, and I'll show you why here in a second. But he does have some very strong Cancerian traits otherwise. So let's bring up his chart. And I tell you, the first time I saw Chris Isaac, I thought this guy's going to be a star. If this guy is not going to be a star, then something's wrong here. Because he had it all. He totally had it all. One second, there we go. Browse here. Let's go to the GIF. We're going to get into his chart here. Okay. Alright, so here's his chart. Let's put him right over. Right there. It's right there. I know you want to see the guy. Hold on a second. So I can make it match. Now, let's do it I'll make the chart a little smaller. Alright. So what's interesting about Chris Isaac is that he came out of this scene in San Francisco at that time, which was kind of like punk new wave. I wish we could get better. Hold on a second. Stuff there. He kind of came out of this kind of punk new wave. He was in this rockabilly band. So he's an Aquarius rising. You can see the Aquarius ascendant here, and he has Moon on the ascendant in Aquarius. So it's a really interesting placement for the Moon because number one, it's going to give the individual kind of a Cancerian vibe, right? And with anytime you have Moon in the first house, I don't care what the sign is, it gives the individual this kind of, interesting, emotional, intuitive, sensitive feeling. And obviously he's no stranger to the ladies. With Moon in the first house, a lot of times women will be attracted to a male who has Moon in the first house, generally because of their sensitivity, or just women in general, right? So, but he's got Moon in Aquarius, which makes his Moon unusual. It's not your basic average kind of lunar operation on the first house. So there's a sensitivity and there's an intuition, but there's also a fair amount of attachment as well. And I can tell you that Chris might have had an interesting relationship with his mother. Anytime you get a Moon Saturn square in the chart, it's challenging with the mom. I have it in my chart. I've seen it in a number of charts. And a Moon in Aquarius, if the mother was not available, which is generally the case with the Moon Saturn square, Moon in Aquarius will detach. It will often do its own thing. The person will wind up mothering themselves. with a moon in the first house. Again, doesn't matter what sign. But his moon is in a grand trine with Neptune over here, and all the way down to Venus over here, which is in the final degrees of Gemini. So he's got a grand air trine, and of course when you deal with Venus and the moon, you're dealing with feminine aspects. And you throw Neptune in there, and what do you have? You've got sort of this dreamy, kind of, romantic energy, but it's in the air sign, so it's communicated through the air, through the airwaves. And Chris Isaak, of course, became famous on radio and MTV. Wicked Game, right? Wicked Game. And Wicked Game kind of lines up with all of this, with this grand trine. There's also this kind of, you get eroticism when you have Moon-Pluto opposition, because there's a tension, right? There's a dynamic tension between control and obsession and letting go, and there's a lot that goes on with it. Anytime you get into the Moon-Pluto dialogue, and he has Jupiter-Pluto conjunction, and generally speaking, Jupiter-Pluto conjunctions represent money and lots of it, resources. And we have the sextile to Neptune, and we have the sextile to Venus, and it's through partnership that the resources come to him. His guitarist's name was Jimmy Woolsey. I don't know what sign Jimmy Woolsey is. I haven't looked it up. But he also has Mars. He's got a fairly wide first house, and he's got Mars over here in Pisces. So there's that. Again, it's kind of a flip, right? There's the moon, which is lunar, and it's aqueous and receptive, but it's in this very cool and unusual position with Aquarius and the ascendant. It's like, yeah, I can remember. Like, I don't think you'll ever get to know Chris Isaak, though. I don't think you'll ever get to know him. He doesn't have any Earth in his chart either. Have you noticed that? If you go down to the grid down here to the right, he's got no Earth in his chart. Now he does have the true node in the 10th, so he does try to ground himself through his career. He does everything in the second house, and he has Uranus in the 6th house, so he would have to have an unusual occupation, right? Anytime you get Uranus in the 6th house, guarantee you person's got to do their own thing, or they're going to do something different, unusual, creative, unique. But he's got Mars in, so Mars is a force too in the first house. Again, that's a pretty wide first house. Mars is a force as well in the first house, but it's in Pisces, so it's a subtle force, right? It's kind of magnetic and tidal, and yet, there's some energy here with Mars Sun trine. What Chris Isaak was? He was a boxer, so we see potentially the Mars Sun trine, but more importantly, maybe that true node in Sagittarius up on the midheaven, which is dynamic and active, and to a large degree is trying to express itself through authenticity and the quest for some larger piece, some bigger truth, some larger piece of the pie, the bigger picture with but Sagittarius also very much connected to sports. And we've got Venus and the Sun in the 5th house, and Chris Isaak is a big sports fan, hangs out around the Bay Area, and does a lot of, he and Jimmy Woolsey do a lot of national anthems together before games. It's an interesting chart, and he's got that very creative Sun-Neptune trine. He's got the creative Venus-Neptune trine, collaboration, creative collaboration. Mars-Mercury square, he could have a bit of a temper. Mercury in the 4th house, this is somebody who would like to fix things around the house, by the way. Chris Isaak would be a fix-it guy. And he's got some psychic ability. He's got some psychic stuff here with Mercury and the Moon trine. It's interesting, he had a TV show on Showtime a while ago, right? The Chris Isaak show. Anyway, an interesting chart, and that Jupiter-Pluto conjunction, quite intense. And there's that smoldering opposition to the moon, right? Hot. Leo's hot. Aquarius is cool. And Chris Isaak manages to communicate both hot and cool simultaneously. Okay, let's move on to another chart. Let's say goodbye to this chart. Yes. And I'm just going to bring this next guy right on to, it's a very different look. Okay, I know you're probably enjoying the Chris Isaak look, but this is going to be a very different look, and it might be a little bit shocking, but You know, life's a rainbow. It's made of so many different colors. And people. That's what makes it interesting. Here we go. Hold on. That's not what we want. We want this one. Hold on. We're going to get there. No, we'll get to both eventually. Give me 1 sec. Let's see. Hold on a second here. Do this. All right, here we go. What's that? Okay. It's a little bit of a different look than Chris Isaac. Let me make sure you guys see this. There it is. Okay. That's Ross Perot. Yeah, I know, a little bit different. Very successful guy, though. Let's bring up his chart. He's got a very interesting chart. And we're going to look at it right now. All right, so there's Ross Perot's chart. Fascinating. So one of the things that Ross Perot has in spades are planets in Cancer. Jupiter, Sun, Moon, Pluto. And if we, let me see if I can bring up the, so I can do this here real time. I'm going to bring up the US chart. And I'm going to add it to Ross Perot's chart because there was a very interesting kind of confluence, right, between Ross Perot in the United States and the people. In some ways, Ross Perot was kind of like the original Trump, in some ways. He certainly wasn't as abrasive as Trump, but he was clearly pretty clairvoyant when he talked about what's that sucking sound, that's the jobs that are going away, and he was referring to NAFTA, and Ross Perot was absolutely 100% correct about that. All right, so I'm going to bring up the USA chart here, and we're going to just play a little bit with Perot chart. Okay, so let's see. Oh, this is not the one I want up here. This is, what chart is this? That's not right. That's the USA chart of 2017. Hold on. That is the eclipse chart. Hold on. There it is. This is the one I want. We'll look at that chart next week. There we go. There it is. There it is. Alright. Let me get back to you. Here. Let's go. Right there. Bada bing. Alright. Give me 1 second. I just thought I just had it up here. Hold on. I apologize. When we get there, we shall overcome. Alright, there we go. So there's the United States chart, and here's Ross Perot's chart. Now, you can see that Perot has this stellium, this big, fat stellium in Cancer. Jupiter in Cancer, 0, Sun in Cancer, 5 degrees, Moon in Cancer, 17, and Pluto in Cancer, and is that 16? 16. If you go across to the United States chart, you'll see there's a lot of Cancer planets connecting and hooking up with Ross Perot. Venus in Cancer, 3 degrees, conjunct his Jupiter at 0 degrees. So you got a Jupiter-Jupiter conjunction, Jupiter-Sun conjunction. I mean, Ross Perot theoretically should have become president of the United States. With these aspects, he should have become president of the United States. He had enough, and he's got a new moon in Cancer, and he's obviously tied to the country, right? He's got Moon, Pluto conjunct the Sun here. It's very interesting. And his Jupiter and his rising sign, his ascendant is what is this? So his ascendant is 9 degrees. 9-degree ascendant. So between Jupiter and the Sun in the United States chart, right there on his ascendant, this guy should have won. For all intents and purposes, he should have become president of the United States, just based on the fact that he could connect with the people. The problem was he was running against the Clintons. And I remember clearly at one point, Ross Perot got some kind of a message. And all of a sudden, he started to, like, you know, kind of, he didn't look as good in the debates, and, you know, it didn't work for Ross. Because at some point, it was almost like he stopped trying. Had this guy been allowed to just run on his platform, I think Ross Perot could have easily been the president of the United States. Just if he had gotten to the vote, he could have been president of the United States. Just based on the relationship with the United States chart. I don't think it's yeah. The problem with Ross Perot is that I think he took a dive. And he did not even get that far. Now, if you look over here, he's got Saturn in Capricorn, and it's in opposition with all of those planets that he has in Cancer. And, you know, he made his money through Walmart. I've talked about this before. If you look at where Uranus is in his 10th house, right, and you look at where Mercury is in his 12th house in Gemini, he's got a Mercury-Uranus sextile. He made his money off of a software called Just-in-Time. And the Just-in-Time software revolutionized, along with Sam Walton's big box stores, revolutionized how things were bought. Because before, you'd have to have a warehouse, and you have to store things, or if something was out, you'd have to order it. Sometimes you'd have to wait days. Well, what happened was that they had this check-in process. It was all computerized. It never been computerized before, and this is what Ross Perot did. He computerized Walmart's inventory. So when something would be, if you had 10 items on something, you got down to item number 3, automatically there would be a message sent to the warehouse to deliver 7 more. So that's Uranus up in the 10th house, right? It's revolutionizing the work. And with Gemini, sextile Uranus, it's computers and figuring things out. This is what Ross Perot did. The son made his money. But he made deals with people because he's got this Saturn over here in Capricorn. And it's opposing all of his Cancerian planets. And I think what happened at some point is that these partners, these Capricornian partners, decided that they were going to call in the chips with Ross Perot. And so he had to do a deal with Saturn. That's my sense here. And I don't know what that deal was. If I had a week, I could figure it out. Maybe even 48 hours. And if I dove into the internet, I could figure it out. But he had a Saturnine deal that he had made. And it opposed all of these Cancerian planets. Now, from another perspective, Saturn is the father, right? And so he wanted to do his own thing. And that's another interpretation of this. He wanted to do his own thing. But really, it's the deal, because it's in the 7th house. It's right there on the cusp of the 7th house. deals, agreements, contracts. And that was getting called in. Now, during that time, this is 1992? So we had Saturn. Saturn was in Aquarius at that time. So it was going through Perot's 8th house. Saturn was going through his 8th house, and to some degree his 9th house, I believe. And then what else was going on? We had Pluto. I think Pluto was in, of course, Pluto was in Scorpio. That was down in his 5th house. But we started to get those, weren't those stelliums, or the conjunctions in Capricorn coming right around that time? Pretty sure, but right around 92. Yeah, because I remember 93 they were there. Neptune and Uranus and Capricorn. So those would have been disturbing patterns in partnership for Perot, for sure. Anyway, it's a very interesting chart. Very interesting chart. And even though his sun is here, close to the ascendant, he's still a behind-the-scenes guy. Everything about Ross Perot, you know, it's like, where did he come from? I mean, he just came up from out of the blue. But he'd been working on things behind the scenes for quite a while. And then, of course, he came back in 96, and there was really no energy left in that. And I remember back in 92 going to a Ross Perot place in San Francisco. It was, you know, right there on Van Ness. It's a high ticket item to have, you know, a place right there in Van Ness. And I walked in, it was at nighttime, and I said, I don't think he's going to win. And the woman was she was really not happy with me. And I said, no, the energy's gone. The energy's left the campaign. He's not going to win. Something happened. He did a deal. I said that. No, he didn't. No. She was very upset. But hey, I was 32, and I had something that I wanted to share, apparently. All right, let's do another one. You know, before I do that, let me just check in with everybody, see how everybody's doing in the old chat room. What do we got here? We've got Judy. Hi, Judy. Judy there. No sound. Let's see. I'm sorry if I was sound off. Listen. Okay, can't have based on this podcast. Okay. If the replay works. Sorry, kids. It's not happening, huh? Okay. All right. Checking the window. So I'm sorry. I've been trying to. Yeah. Jeez. All right. I apologize. No, I apologize. This is. I'm getting it. I apologize. All right. I'm going to end the podcast. I'm going to end it here. I apologize. It sucks. Stream health. Okay, here we go. Well, if you're listening to this, thank you. There's only 2 people watching. Everybody's gone. Have a good night.